Breaking news, information that will most likely end up with more than one criticism. Vladimir Putin meeting with the current leader of Syria, the former terrorist Al-Yulani, with whom the government of the Russian Federation now seems to be reaching more than one agreement. The images speak for themselves, and what if you end up watching this until the end? Also, you will realize to what extent there are synergies, and above all, the reason for these synergies between both governments. The current government of Syria praising President Putin and the soldiers of the Russian Federation, who gloriously protected their country in an absolutely heroic way. Also, using a rather interesting and quite special ally for this purpose. I imagine that this particular meeting will have consequences, so I consider it absolutely necessary to comment on it and talk about these events with the truth. Because here we speak in terms of geopolitics for adults and try to analyze the facts as objectively as possible. So, what is behind this meeting? This apparently very good relationship between Vladimir Putin and Al-Yulani? And who is the one losing in this new, seemingly increasingly firm alliance between New Syria and the Russian Federation? This is where we have these images, which I repeat, I imagine will end up causing a lot of controversy. The current government of Syria recently arrived in Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin. Has this meeting actually taken place between Vladimir Putin and the president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sarraj, better known as Al-Yulani? The negotiations have taken place within the framework of strengthening Russian-Syrian cooperation, the future of Russian bases, and the development of bilateral economic relations. Vladimir Putin congratulated the Syrian president on the restoration of the country's territorial integrity. The first surprising fact, because here Vladimir Putin has spoken directly about what happened in Syria just a few days ago. In terms of this Kurdish control, which existed mainly in the regions of the country with the most oil, in fact, those areas are now under the control of the government, which is now in the leading position. And this must be remembered very clearly. Not under the control of the United States, far from it, but under the control of Turkey. This precisely is one of the fundamental keys to the issue of Syria. It's just that people can interpret it as a kind of, well, I don't know, practically Putin's friendships with leaders, except maybe Xi Jinping, some of the most historic ones, with whom he has effectively already formed practically a friendly alliance or a real friendship. We could say that here we are talking about interests. And as we now look at the latest statements made by both leaders, these interests will become crystal clear. First of all, these territories that were controlled by the Kurds, along with some very strange allies who came from the Islamic State. It turns out that, in turn, they were under control. Lastly, on the part of the United States, in other words, when we're talking about a loss of power and territory, we really shouldn't mention Russia so much, but rather the American interest in the end. And in that regard, Mr. Erdogan has played a tremendously bad trick on the United States, because the Kurds had those territories. The United States, therefore, had access to that oil, but now everything is under strict control. Well, I could talk about the leader of Syria or about Syria itself, but actually, of course, here we're talking about Turkey, and this is also where we reach these objectives. What about the latest statements from both leaders? Statements from Vladimir Putin about the meeting that actually took place at the Kremlin with the current leader of Syria. The Russian construction complex is ready to help with the reconstruction of Syria. We are going to translate this absolutely immediately. This involves huge amounts of investments from the Russian Federation in the country, and therefore the legalization of the Russian presence there. Therefore, the interests of the Russian Federation in the region, from which it seems absolutely no one is planning to remove them. A lot has been done to restore relations between Russia and Syria since the last visit of the Syrian leader in October. In the relations between Russia and Syria, there have not, in fact, been any dark chapters since the recognition of Damascus's independence during World War II. Russia and Syria have good activities planned in the fields of industry, sports, and medicine. That is to say, the Russian Federation will be helping Syria because it is the one that has the most to offer in terms of assistance. In addition, in return, it will receive these absolutely strategic resources. Here we would have to see what Vladimir Putin and Erdogan might be agreeing on behind the scenes, because Erdogan is absolutely aware. I imagine that he will also have to count on Russia because, in fact, Al-Yulani himself is already counting on that country. Russia plays an important role in stabilizing the situation in Syria and throughout the Middle East. Damascus and Moscow have many topics that can be studied and discussed. In addition, he thanked Putin for his efforts to stabilize the situation in the Arab Republic. Meanwhile, I repeat, Vladimir Putin praised the fact that the current government of Syria has taken control of most of the country. In this regard, there will definitely be more than one person who will say no to me, right? If the Kurds are better than those who are currently governing in Syria, probably yes or probably no. The Kurds were controlled by Americans. They ended up being betrayed by their supposed allies, which they never really had. I mean, they were supposed to be allies. What happens is that geopolitics creates very strange alliances. Like, for example, in this case, when Russia, in theory, was supporting the SAS until the very end, to the point of granting them asylum in their own country, giving them refuge in every sense of the word. And I already have a specific video about the topic of the supposed Russian betrayal in Syria. I'm not going to repeat myself about it. Whoever wants it, whoever wants to know my opinion, just watch this video that's on the channel, and it's clearly explained there. What realpolitik is, which is this approach where what truly rules is the ultimate interest. Russian Federation, and in this case, the current Syrian government as well. Russia is not to blame for the fact that Bashar al-Assad was unable to convince the majority of his population that they truly needed to fight to keep him in power. And it has to negotiate the future of its military bases, the future of its interests in the region. Because, in addition, there are other countries that need help. For example, in this case, we are not mentioning them. Lately, Iran is very much involved, and now it finds itself in a very clear predicament under United States pressure, which wants to almost turn it to ashes, simply withdrawing from the region and losing the work of so many years, calling into question, even more so, its objectives and strategic interests, its military bases. There is no diplomatic wisdom behind it at all, but look, also to what extent. It seems that a very good level of synergy has already been reached between the Russian Federation and the current Syrian government. Because, in fact, Al-Yulani himself has been talking, in addition to what was agreed with Vladimir Putin, about another very particular issue on his way to the Kremlin. When I left the airport, I saw a lot of snow on the road. This reminded me of a unique story, a story from the past. I remembered how many military campaigns from different forces tried to reach Moscow and how they failed afterwards because of the bravery of Russian soldiers. And that nature itself also helped them defend this blessed land. That's why we always ask God for their safety. That is, here we're not just talking about good synergies, it seems, between both countries now. But this goes so far that the current leader of Syria is no longer openly demanding to base the SAAD, at least not openly. And it seems he has agreed to all the requests made by the Russian Federation and prays for the security of that country. To more than one person, this might seem strange, but it doesn't surprise me at all. Interests are interests. And geopolitics, as we've said more than once, does make for very strange allies. Now it's time to make deals, time to face off. Or well, let me see how I can put it. Now it's time to analyze reality as it is, and ultimately it's time to accept reality as it is. And well, the Russian Federation can't, I repeat, perform miracles, nor could it fight for Syria more than the Syrians themselves could. It gave everything to Bashar al-Assad's government, but it's gone now, and that's Bashar al-Assad. He is still under the control of the Russian Federation, under the utmost hospitality of the Russian Federation. Because he is living very comfortably, I know for a fact, in Moscow, and Russia's control is maintained as long as his security is guaranteed. Also, regarding what others may demand concerning his life and interests, his physical integrity, other countries, including Syria, his country of origin. This marks a new chapter in the defense of the national interests of the Russian Federation in the region. Many people didn't give much for the Russian military bases in Syria after the coup by Al-Yulani against Assad. But look at how now Russia, it seems, continues to gain power in the country. Turkey, without a doubt, is the country that benefits the most in today's Syria, and the one that loses the most is supposedly one of Turkey's historical allies. Meanwhile, since both are in NATO, but now at times they almost become enemies. And above all, one of the historical enemies of the Russian Federation, who was there trying to meddle in Syria. But in the end, it has come to an end. Faced with necessity, given the situation, they had to accept the urgent need to abandon the territories they had been controlling through the Kurds and others until now.